When my rustic shed became the target of my HOA's tyranny, I realized this fight wasn't just about aesthetics. It was time to reclaim our community spirit and defy the pastel oppressors. Before we begin today's deranged HOA story, tell me you haven't had your fill of irrational and power-grabbing HOA nonsense. Smash that like button to show you're on my side, and drop a comment if you've ever faced off against an overbearing homeowners association. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell, because this saga's only getting crazier from here. The fateful day of operation, Creative Liberation Day, dawned with a sparkle that could only be rivaled by a toddler wielding a birthday cake. I stood at the center of my yard, decked out in a riotous ensemble of cargo pants covered in paint splatters and a flannel shirt, my own personal battle uniform. Cacti and inflatable flamingos surrounded me, each one conspiring in colorful splendor, awaiting their moment to shine. Laughter punctuated the air as neighbors congregated to style their gardens into chaotic masterpieces. A sticky warmth clung to the morning, one that buzzed with wild anticipation, promising a glorious spectacle against our pastel-clad foe. Of course, Karen had chosen this day to unleash her own brand of law and order, as ironic as a cat in a tuxedo, I thought. But nothing could dampen our spirits. My trusty sidekick, Rafe, rambled next to me, holding up a garden gnome dressed like Elvis. "I call him Gnomney Rivers," he said, sporting a side grin that could slice through steel. "Imagine Karen's face when she sees this guy serenading her pristine lawn," I chuckled, picturing the weighty expression of the HOA queen morphing into pure confusion, her pastel blazers possibly combusting from sheer rage. "Oh, and don't forget about the disco ball," I replied, gesturing across the yard where a few neighbors were wrestling with their own delightfully absurd creations. I mean, who wouldn't take pride in a yard that screamed "nature party" louder than a toddler at a sugar-fueled birthday bash? As the competition rolled into full swing, I glanced at Mr. Party Jenkins, who was arranging solar-powered flamingos, one of which was proudly sporting a glittery tiara. His face radiated pure glee. "With this fabulous display, they'll have no choice but to accept our artistic vision," he proclaimed, puffing out his chest like he had just declared himself emperor of a floral kingdom. I grinned, thrilled to see everyone embracing their inner rebels. Left unchecked, the monochrome aesthetic of the HOA would soon meet its day of reckoning as our outdoor gallery of glitzy chaos took shape, blossoming like a garden after a spring rain. The moment arrived when we would parade our ridiculous creativity right in front of Karen's castle of conformity. With a drumroll provided by the raucous laughter echoing through the air, we formed a twisted conga line, our garden decorations waving behind us like an army of color-drenched warriors. I spotted Karen marching down the street, her dictator's gaze fixed upon us like a hawk eyeing its prey. She flared her nostrils, taking in the sight of our floral and flamboyant revolution, a masterclass of lawn artistry that could only be described as a journey into madness. "What is the meaning of this travesty?" she shrilled, color draining from her appeasingly combed hair. Suddenly, from behind me, Kyle emerged, a sight to behold clad in tactical gear that was both formidable and utterly ridiculous. "If there's anything a posh pastel blazer can't conquer, it's irony," he said, gesturing dramatically toward our creations. Armed with a confetti cannon in hand, his weapon of choice for the day, he winked at me, fully prepared to backfire Karen's indisputably absurd comments with a colorful explosion of his own. "Remember, aim high and make it fabulous," he shouted, eliciting raucous cheers from the onlookers. If Karen had any hope of regaining her stronghold over our community, it was about to be obliterated by the sheer ridiculousness of our collaborative effort. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, the laughter ringing around me like a supportive anthem. "Karen, aren't you tired of your dull garden gnome evaluations?" I quipped, arms spread wide to encompass the creative mayhem surrounding us. The assembled crowd knew their purpose: to break free of the oppressive precautions and rigid regulations that had stifled their individual spirits for far too long. This day is about us, our colors, and our outrageous spirit. We will not conform to a cookie-cutter standard that tries to fit every fantastic individuality into a bland box. The air erupted into applause and cheers, the triumphant noise reverberating against the traditionally beige backdrop of Karen's decorum. Sweating from both excitement and fervor, I added, "Why settle for beige when we can blind the HOA with our brilliance?" Just then, Karen clutched her chest, her mouth agape in shock, eyes darting from the animated decorations to the beaming faces of our neighborhood revolutionaries. Fueled by laughter and determination, I felt invincible, like a warrior taking back a kingdom where laughter was the currency and creativity was the sword. But would it be enough to push back against the relentless rules and fine-toting tyrants that had snuffed out our fun for too long? It was a risk worth taking, and if necessary, we'd brandish our air horns and giant inflatable dinosaurs. Game on, Karen. Would she dare to retaliate against our mouth-watering madness? As if the universe were collaborating with our glorious rebellion, a gust of wind swept through the street, sending a torrent of confetti into the air like a vibrant explosion of technicolor warfare. Block parties had nothing on this, as our assembled neighbors erupted into fits of laughter, faces painted in awe and disbelief. I caught a glimmer of hope as Karen's usually ironclad composure began to crack. Her tight lips twitched as she tried to suppress a smirk, ripping it from the clutches of decorum. But within that moment, a twisted sort of clarity washed over me. I had to leverage this absurd chaos while it lasted. Confetti had become the battle cry of a new age, and I had my sights set on the ultimate target. Restoring joy and disrupting Karen's monochromatic reign, a sudden echo of shouting pulled me from my merriment, and to my utter disbelief, there she was, Mrs. Harrington, our fellow neighbor and Karen's minion, wielding a garden hose like it was a weapon of mass garden construction. "You call this a yard?" she bellowed, shooting streams of water in our direction, likely intending to dismantle our artistic display. But the sheer audacity of the gesture was almost comedic, as if she were charging into battle with a foam sword against dragons. Just out of reach, the vibrant landscape transformed into a derelict landscape of flying paintballs splattered with color. I quickly dodged, secretly impressed at her spontaneity, but my gut instinct told me that if there was a water fight, we would all be soaked together in laughter. Or more importantly, a preschool level of chaos. "Deploy the water balloons!" I shouted into the fray, my voice ringing with the authority of a makeshift sergeant in this pastel battleground. Rafe, who had just sipped his iced tea, nearly spatted across the yard from laughter. "You want bouncy chaos? I'll give you a volley of spray," he answered. And in a swift motion, he yanked up his own water balloons, and like a child at play, he whipped them toward Mrs. Harrington. A direct hit ensued, the balloon bursting in a splash of liquid hilarity, momentarily shattering her frown. Meanwhile, confetti continued to drift down like a cult of neon fairies, celebrating our fight for freedom from dull gardens. It was the perfect reminder that in the grand theater of life, sometimes all one needs is a hearty laugh to launch a revolution. Just then, a screech pierced the air, laced with horror. This is an abomination," Karen exclaimed, rising to her full height with all the poise of an affronted peacock. "You are all ruining our community's reputation." The sight of her pastel armor, rather than intimidating, now looked ludicrous, especially as bits of mud and a rogue balloon splat accumulated on her blazer. I couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. I half expected her to attempt banishing us with a spell of concentration or, God forbid, an HOA meeting. The absurdity of an HOA queen being exposed to a garden warfare waged with the joyful spirits of her neighbors was almost sublime. Her weighty threats were only punctuating the swift and humorous demise of her carefully crafted facade. In a surprisingly strategic move, I glanced over my shoulder, taking in the sights. Kyle was cranking the confetti cannon, as if it were a mythical weapon from a legend, while others created cheerleader formations, chanting witty rhymes that mocked the HOA hierarchy. "For every gnome you slap with a fine, we'll throw a rainbow party on this line," they sang. It was pure bliss, a testament to the power of community spirit and absurdity wrapped into one glorious package. I took a deep breath, feeling the energy shift in my chest. This is how you reclaim your joys, Karen. You don't oppress us with your pastel prison. You join us in embracing the chaotic arts of rebellion. With that, I lunged forward, snatching a bright blue paintball from the bucket behind me. And with the might of a paint-slinging warrior, I aimed at Karen, letting the paintball fly. It burst against the pristine front of her blazer with gratifying explosive force, dyeing her outfit in a sudden splash of fluorescent blue. Silence swallowed the neighborhood momentarily before erupting once again into a cacophony of laughter and raucous cheers from my fellow color revolutionary. With her eyes wide and mouth agape, Karen stood there, shock morphing her expression into something between outrage and bemusement. She resembled a startled duck wearing a royal crown. "How dare you?" she finally shouted, sputtering like a broken record, but she was far too disheveled to maintain the integrity of her authoritative grasp. Suddenly, a memory sparked in my mind, one of endless summers spent sneaking onto slip and slides, where everything that didn't fit into the box of propriety was thrown out the window. I realized that perhaps Mrs. Harrington, the arrogant enforcer of our erstwhile drab lifestyle, was only a few splashes away from joining our vibrant side. Karen, you don't have to stand in the shade. Join the color wars. Feel the frenzy. After all, isn't life meant to be lived out loud? I challenged, the words flying from my mouth before I fully appreciated their absurdity. I, a radical neighborhood rogue, taunting the queen of a pastel empire. But the ridiculousness of my request felt right in the chaos of splashes and laughter. As Karen glared at me, considering her next move, I could feel the momentum in the air shift once again. Was it possible that the iron grip of her pastel gnome governance could finally be shattered in a fitting explosion of color and mayhem? This was where we would build a legacy of laughter and reclaim our neighborhood spirit. So daring, so ridiculous. As the paint splatters dripped and the laughter rang, I marveled at the bizarre beauty of the afternoon, holding my breath for what came next. Could laughter truly become our shield against the relentless rules? Would the color revolution be victorious? I couldn't help but feel that while we were engaged in a battle of hues and humor, the outcome was already bound to flourish beautifully. With every second that ticked by, the potency of the absurdity we had conjured began to resonate ever more deeply within me. Could it be that Karen Hargrove, our local HOA overlord, the self-proclaimed guardian of blandness, was faltering in the face of our joyful rebellion? I cast another glance at the scene unfolding before me. Neighbors turned warriors, brandishing hoses and water balloons, drenching one another while hooting with laughter as if the world had flipped upside down in the most delicious way. This miniature riot was like something out of a comic book, a whimsical, colorful upheaval against the harsh, monochrome rules of Karen's tyrannical reign. I felt like what I imagined a history maker must feel, deep in the trenches of a joyful revolution, the kind you only read about and care about in spectacularly dramatic novels. But not far off, Karen rose back into her attempt at authority, gathered herself with what dignity she could muster, which, let's be honest, was like a cat trying to look dignified while wearing a tutu. "I will not allow this disgraceful behavior to continue," she shrieked like a toad who swallowed a hornet. I swear, I could almost hear her pastel blazer crinkling like it was stifling a snicker of its own. Even Mrs. Harrington, mid-spraying, paused as if considering whether to laugh or hang her head in shame at her commander's theatrics. But that was it. This was the crossroads of our neighborhood saga. Redefining joy over the binding rules of Karen's monochromatic imaginations was our ticket to liberation. Would it require good-natured mockery? Absolutely. Would it spill over into a rainbow painted free for all? Already happening! Just as I was fueled with determination, I caught a slight movement behind me. Rafe. Oh, sweet, sweet Rafe. He had somehow transformed into a water balloon launching machine, and with every toss, my rioting spirits joined with his laughter in a symphony of defiance. He looked over at me and said, "Hey Jordan, what's next? Should we let her know she's now officially a public mascot for the worst HOA president ever?" My laughter bubbled at the thought. Here we were, armed with paintball artillery and water bombs, the unlikely platoon of joyful rebels set on disarming Karen's reign with whimsy. I raised my balloon-laden hands high in emulation of a referee. I hereby declare the color wars in full force. May the odds of hilarity be ever in our favor. At that moment, the absurdity of my role as the whimsical general erupted through the giggles of my neighbors. I didn't just want the banter. I needed to plunge deeper into this delightful nonsense. I could see Karen's resolve waver as Rafe feigned throwing another water balloon, causing her to flinch. "Come on, Karen," I called out. "Isn't it time to ditch the strict decorum? I guarantee you'll feel lighter with splashes of color and chaos in your life." Who knew? All of our antics might break the icy grip she had on her self-imposed power. It felt as though the whole universe was conspiring against the blandness she thrived on, while cheering for the unexpected joy. Maybe we were on the verge of awakening the joyous spirit buried somewhere beneath the pastel layers of overbearing responsibility. But then, like clockwork, she retaliated, drawing on that deep, untapped well of ignorance that only the truly overly entitled possess. "I will ensure you all face the consequences of this daring rebellion." Her eyes blazed like two little embers smoldering in despair. I found myself rolling my eyes so hard I thought they might leap right out of my head. Did she actually believe anyone would take her seriously in her current state? I fought against the urge to pull a popcorn bucket from thin air, forcing myself to stay immersed in the riotous scenery. "Oh, Karen," I called back. "Consequences? Is that what we're calling this fun festival? Because it looks to me like you might just be fading into a public display of mortification. Careful. You might just find that people prefer community parties more than your precious fines." And boom, just like that, the crowd exploded into shrieks of laughter. My neighbors, dizzy with excitement and the delightful absurdity of it all, were having the time of their lives while Karen's tightly wound facade crumbled amid colorful laughter. As I eyed the look on her face, I wondered, could we coax a smile out of her? Or were we doomed to grovel at the feet of a grumpy ruler forever? It baffled me to think that, underneath her pastel blazer patrolled like a tin soldier, there might lie a woman who once shared giggles over garden gnomes. Wouldn't that be a twist? You know, I hollered back to her, your beige and brown garden dreams could use a dash of joy. Trust me, it's contagious. In that moment, a peculiar epiphany struck me like one of Rafe's wayward water balloons. Could it be that joy was indeed a radical notion in the world of lawn care and community regulations? Perhaps all it took was one raucous paintball-fueled day of revelry to shatter her monochrome monarchy for the vibrant kaleidoscope of unity to blossom. With adrenaline igniting my spirit, I stood firm and flung another valuable paintball into the fray, laughter erupting with every drenching layer of color. Whatever doubtful grip Karen held might be crumbling at the edges. The laughter and camaraderie knitted our neighborhood closer than any sternly worded fine ever could. How was it possible that we had traded ghastly threats for an explosion of giggles and joy? Just maybe, we were throwing in colors of rebellion that would stick long after the splashes dried up. And there we danced, painted warriors, in a symphony of laughter, drenched dreams, and carefully constricted rules being challenged as we redefined what it meant to be neighbors. I glanced once more at Karen, watching as she fought against the absurdity of it all, half startled, half amused. This was no ordinary neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a joyful uproar, a cacophony of colors, a radiant rebellion. As we tossed our next arsenal of water balloons and paintballs against the backdrop of laughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, we were sculpting a new tradition where freedom of expression reigned supreme over the reign of pastel, a legacy we'd be proud of. Could we laugh our way to victory and create a new HOA, complete with a color chart? Now that would be something to write home about. As I stared in disbelief at the letter, my morning coffee starting to feel more like a bitter brew than a comforting elixir, I couldn't help but chuckle at the sheer absurdity of it all. A rustic shed, my rustic shed, which had been standing proud all summer, now deemed a criminal by my local HOA. I half expected the letter to come with a side of dramatic background music and a cast of ridiculous characters in costume. Was Karen Hargrove, reigning HOA tyrant, planning a theatrical reenactment of her reign of terror? Perhaps I'd be called to a trial where my shed would be the defendant, with Karen as the fiery prosecutor brandishing a pencil and a codebook as her weapons of choice. I took a deep breath and channeled my inner Julia Child. Bon appétit, I muttered, slipping my glasses onto the tip of my nose. In a flurry of indignation, think exclamation marks flying everywhere, I dashed across the street to Rafe's place, my sprint resembling that of a determined gazelle. He opened the door, clearly caught off guard, looking like he was half targeting a high score on his video game and half trying to locate his left shoe. "Oh, it's you. What's the crisis today? Did the fence gnome finally declare war?" he teased, raising an eyebrow while I flopped down dramatically on his couch, coffee/panic bubbling over like an undercooked macaroni pot. "Rafe, they're coming for my shed, my beautiful rustic shed," I lamented, my voice climbing an octave out of pure melodrama. I could only imagine Karen waving a clipboard like a prop sword, ready to duel us in the name of perfect community aesthetics. With his trademark smirk, Rafe flopped down beside me, the casual vibe of our friendship juxtaposed against the impending HOA doom. "Uh-oh, brace yourself. This sounds like a great Karen incident. What's next? Will they begin citing HOA violations for overly exuberant sunflowers?" The horror! We both broke into laughter, the absurdity of the situation providing a much-needed levity to our battle. However, humor faded when I began recounting the details of their grand scheme, like some bad reality show where everyone gets a saying too much, but ultimately achieves too little. The audacity, the entitlement! It was as if Karen was channeling her inner villain from all those 80s movies. I mean, what's next? Do I need to put a designer footstool outside and hire a butler to make tea for my shrubbery? I scoffed, reeling at the mental image. Then the air thickened with determination as I hatched my plan of rebellion. "We're going to fight this," I declared, my pulse quickening with the thrill of defiance. "You and I are going to uncover every loophole in this absurd HOA nonsense. I want the dusty file cabinet, the forgotten rules. They're about to become our best friends." Rafe nodded, his earlier sarcasm replaced with genuine excitement. "Operation Shed Save it is. Let's turn this HOA drama into our very own gnome-themed treasure hunt. You take the left side of the street, I'll take the right. In the end, We'll be showered with all the code violations and hidden approvals they shove under the rug. We grinned at each other, fueled by caffeine and the power of hatching conspiracies, imagining dashing through Karen's pale domain with a fistful of legal papers. To bolster our plan, I dove into the depths of the HOA website, which was like traversing a virtual minefield of overly pompous legal jargon. I could practically see Karen and her pastel blazer hovering above the screen, judging my every click. As I gathered information, I felt like a detective unraveling the mystery of a lifelong comatose HOA. How dare they callously ticket my beloved shed while Karen sat atop her throne? I was convinced she had performed sacrificial rituals with garden gnomes, offering them as tributes to uphold her precarious power. The more I learned about the HOA's obscure rules that seemed to sprout like weeds in a neglected garden, the more I became convinced that rebellion was afoot, dressed flawlessly in cargo pants. Could I be the protagonist in this epic face-off against Karen? Oh, you bet! After hours of poring over pages and making notes with all the fervor of a caffeinated squirrel, I fell onto Rafe's couch, feeling an unhealthy mix of pride and utter exhaustion. Rafe, if my shed is the Titanic, we're practically booking a lifeboat reserved for dirty laundry. The iceberg doesn't stand a chance, I exclaimed, really feeling the drama now. I imagined rallying the neighborhood, gathering my fellow warriors against the HOA's reign of terror. Well, it turned out half the neighborhood was as fed up as a cat watching its owner try to bathe it. My phone buzzed with text after text. People were lining up to put their names down for the front lines of battle against our pastel-clad oppressor. With our plans solidified and our neighbors ready to join the fray, I leaned back and let the sheer excitement wash over me. A hidden sharpshooter in our midst? It was about to become more than a moniker. My shed and I were about to throw down a gauntlet that nobody saw coming. As I glanced out the window, the sun sparkled against my rustic beauty. I could almost hear the HOA folks collectively gasping in horror at the sight. Let them come! Let Karen try to dismantle my sanctuary of creativity and rebellion. The shed would rise again, adorned with a banner reading, "Hurt? Nevermore." In that moment, I knew we weren't just fighting a war over aesthetics. We were reclaiming our rights, the essence of community spirit against the unyielding pastels of tyranny. Would we be victorious? Or had I just signed the HOA's death certificate with a rustic flourish? We were ready, and I could hardly wait for our first meeting with Karen Hargrove. Would she have a fainting couch? Or would this be a more interactive HOA meeting? The thrill of the unknown filled the air. The next day, as I donned my trusty combat cargo pants, seriously, they could probably survive a nuclear apocalypse given how many pockets they had, I felt a surge of excitement. Rafe and I were officially ready to launch Operation Shed Save. Armed with our legal reconnaissance and a dangerously passionate devotion towards thwarting the HOA, we met in my front yard, which was already beginning to feel like the set of a high-stakes heist movie. I pointed out the newly christened Battle HQ, a spot in my yard with a perfect view of the Karen and her pearl-infused watchtower, aka Mrs. Harrington, as she prepared for her daily reconnaissance mission like a general surveying the battlefield. Our focus sharpened as we compared notes, each absurd complaint and hidden rule a new weapon in our arsenal against that pastel fortress of entitlement. Rafe held up a piece of paper, waving it like a victory flag. "Behold the power of forbidden shrubbery codes," he declared, laughing at the ridiculousness of even having these codes. "This will make Karen squirm more than a cat in a room full of cucumber." His smirk was infectious, and for a moment, I didn't feel the weight of the oppressive HOA looming over us like an awkward family reunion. In an effort to lighten the mood, I offered, "What if we staged an invasive art installation in my front yard? Attract the rare Karen-prowling gnome species with an extravagant display of what we've come to call the spirit of rebellion?" I chuckled, gesturing wildly as if curating an avant-garde gallery for her judgment. Just as we were painting our ridiculous masterpiece in the air, Mrs. Harrington made her entrance, complete with a fresh coat of disapproval plastered over her features and her pearl necklace swinging like a pendulum of doom. "Children, you know this yard is looking quite rustic," she sniffed, emphasizing rustic like it was the most vile word in her vocabulary. I could almost hear the collective gasp of my neighbors. Surely they felt the tremors of Karen's judgment too. "I trust you've received the latest round of complaints regarding your shed?" Oh yes, the shed was on trial yet again, and I half expected a gavel to crash down within the onlookers' minds each time she spoke. "Ah, welcome, Mrs. Harrington, to our informal community meeting. What a delightful surprise," I greeted, bubbling with sarcasm thick enough to slice. Rafe stifled a laugh. It seemed only appropriate that our little rebellion began with a proper joust. I practically twirled my metaphorical mustache as I pointed to the collection of complaints displayed on crisp paper, which suddenly made the double space between each complaint seem like the world's most serious human rights violation. Were your complaints submitted with enough adherence to the strict rules of spacing, or do you ultraviolet delight in arbitrary details? I quipped, relishing my chance to poke the beehive. Excessive documentation is a sign of weakness, Mrs. Harrington retorted, her diva-like air a mix of outrage and bemusement. The sight of her shaking maniacally over a packet of supposedly betrayed neighborhood standards steeled my resolve. This was our moment. A rare chance to unleash the collective sigh of frustration uttered by an entire community, tired of tedium. Well, I do think trading integrity for aesthetics is quite a tragedy, I countered, noticing neighbors peek out from behind their curtains, probably indulging in my newfound role as the charismatic spokesperson of defiance. Besides, I added with composure, you'd think a cul-de-sac leader would have better judgment than to milk kindness for all it's worth. But my defiance did not go unnoticed. With a huff, she straightened herself up, as if preparing for a grand finale. I'm sure the board would appreciate supporting the glory of individual choice, but we also have standards to uphold, she snapped back, adjusting her imaginary crown of entitlement. This woman was 2 seconds away from excused sarcasm becoming her defense in an absurd HOA trial, and I was more than ready to turn her potpourri of hollow judgments into a stand-up comedy routine. My fingers began to drum against my thigh as I concocted riotous rebuttals, challenging her authority like a comedian star in a low-budget sitcom. As the standoff reached critical mass, I realized I needed backup. I glanced at Rafe, who was beaming with the same belief that fueled David as he confronted Goliath. Suddenly he shouted, "Remember, we, the legion of the disgruntled HOA members, have voices too. We demand an aerial view of our liberties." That line could have been lifted straight from a Hollywood blockbuster about fighting insurmountable odds while dressed in cheesy costumes. I seized the momentum, rallying our neighborhood army out from behind the curtains, ready to take a stand against this Perry Mason of plights. Who knew that organizing community support would feel like forming a club of culinary wizards, rallying to cook something worth 1,000,000 forks? With everyone perched on the edge of our collective resolve, I could see annoyance morphing on Mrs. Harrington's face as the tide of empowerment washed over our small patch of suburban earth. "I will not be intimidated," she blustered, her pearl necklace swinging wildly in alarm like flapping bird wings. "The HOA knows how to handle these matters. It's about community standards." A chorus of laughter erupted, catching even me off guard. This wasn't just a frivolous fight against ridiculous decorum, it was a full-blown declaration of independence against pastel tyranny. I grinned widely at the unexpected support forming around us. Could this actually lead us to victory against Karen's absurd crusade? Would the HOA be dethroned by our scrappy coalition of worthy residents united in unexpected hilarity? It was time to find out. Just as Mrs. Harrington was tightening her grip on her pearls, quite frankly, they looked as if they might smother her in indignation. Our growing crowd erupted into a chorus of oohs and ahs. It was almost theatrical. I could visualize the showdown in a motion picture, with the stage lights illuminating our anti-hero, Karen, cast in a shadow as our clique of disenchanted residents emerged like a Greek chorus. I glanced at Rafe, whose expression was a blend of surprise and delight, and I realized we were tapping into something wildly exhilarating. It felt as if the spirit of 1,000 disgruntled homeowners had been channeled into our little operation, transforming it into a righteous coup against the oppressive reign of this pearl-wearing diva. "Yes," Rafe shouted, as if suddenly infused with an energy drink intended for marathon runners. "Let the HOA know that we're not just sitting in our lawns, being lulled into complacency by home improvement shows." I could only laugh, noting how wildly inaccurate his metaphor was. Home improvement shows had never lulled any sane person to relaxation. They had incited war and imagination that was impossible to contain. This feeling of empowerment surged through the knot of my stomach, fueling my defiance. Inspiration struck me then, and I shouted back, "Who's with us in the fight for flower freedom and shed justice?" The neighbors around me nodded earnestly, something akin to a neighborhood pep rally kicking into full swing. As I gazed at our unyielding band of homeowners, I was met with a flurry of faces, some wide-eyed with disbelief, others nodding like bobbleheads of solidarity. Old Mr. Jenkins from 2 doors down raised his hand, which trembled slightly, along with a scowl that suggested he was ready to grab the pitchfork instead of just his cell phone to capture the moment. "I'll stand behind you, Jordan," "I've had enough of Karen's ridiculous reign," he shouted, his voice surprisingly booming for a man who always seemed to be cowering behind his curtains. Ah, this was truly the delightful absurdity I so desperately loved and craved in my life. Barefaced rebellion against the oppressive regime of lawn decorum and pastel tyranny. But then, just as our unity began to feel like a delicious slice of victory pie, Mrs. Harrington regained her composure, brushing off the collective outburst like a get-off-my-lawn pest. "Really, people, you can't just ignore standards forever," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with faux horror, and honestly, did she truly think we were just going to allow her to parade around with her delusions of grandeur while we cowered in fear? What was she trying to pull here? A melodrama fit for a soap opera. I could see a duality of emotions wrestling behind that incredulous expression, both outrage and desperate concern over what might come next. Deciding I had nothing to lose in this explosive moment, I stepped each foot into a base of emotional firm ground. "Standards?" I echoed back, my tone sharp enough to slice through a casserole of suburban passive aggression. Standards have not been about aesthetics. They've become a vehicle for self-righteousness while wielding banishment from creativity. A place where individuality goes to die, a wasteland of lawn ornaments and lame yard sales. A ripple of laughter surged, punctuated by the communal release of tension, and I couldn't help but revel in this newfound dynamic. It was thrilling to speak truth to power, like David with his slingshot, except the stone was the injustice of Karen's obsession with conformity. As a menacing cloud of disapproval swept across Mrs. Harrington's horrified face, I seized my moment. Just because we live on the same street doesn't mean we have to adhere to the same humorless square of conformity. Freedom to decorate? Independence within our homes? Isn't that what suburban life is supposed to represent? The crowd, now buzzing with enthusiasm, shouted in agreement, and I could see it began to dawn on Karen that the tide of our small revolution wasn't just a passing phase. The residents weren't simply juggling complaints. We were standing up for what we believed. With each cut of applause, we were hammering a nail into the flimsy coffin of her heavy-handed rule, and it felt more exhilarating than any roller coaster. Sensing the shift in energy, I prepared for the next level of engagement. We may have different tastes in lawn art, but I think we can all agree that the community should not be dictated by one woman's obsession with cleanliness. The claps and cheers roared louder, echoing my sentiment. Karen looked around in pure bewilderment. This was foreign territory for her throne of pretentious superiority. But she was a buoy, bobbing in the middle of turbulent waters, and our community was the storm. So, are we ready to take action? Who's with me in making the HOA actually listen to us, instead of slapping absurd fines on personal expression? I called out, and the ecstatic cries of agreement rang out as an avalanche of independent hope surged forward, transforming our quiet cul-de-sac into a vibrant hub of defiance. "Loud and proud!" Rafe yelled alongside the chorus of zealots, and I could feel the collective spirit of our rebellion blooming before my eyes. In that moment, we were superheroes in cargo pants, capes made of lawn decorations, ready to dismantle the tyranny of the HOA's rule. It was hilariously ridiculous, but everything felt right and alive within me. I could see clear paths of opportunity and mischief unfurling ahead. What would be our next step in this uproarious fight for freedom? We were poised on the brink of something spectacular. The collective roar of our community echoed in my bloodstream, transforming into a powerful elixir of defiance. I felt electric, fist-pumped in solidarity with neighbors, each of whom had until now been confined to their homes by a mean-spirited HOA overlord, each face illuminated with a spark of resistance. I caught Rafe giving me a thumbs up. His easygoing demeanor suddenly turned into that of a coach ready to lead a last-minute victory rally. "Does anyone have a plan?" he shouted, raising an eyebrow in mock confusion, wondering if anyone would genuinely dare to play the hero against such a bureaucratic villain. A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd at the absurdity of that thought, as if we were planning to invade a fortress with gardening tools and lawn flamingos as our weapons. The image of us, armed with decorative kitsch, sent a surge of mirth through me, and I knew that no one could keep us quiet any longer. But first, we needed a master plan, a scheme of sorts that would prove our case against Karen and her tyrannical reign of garden gnome regulation. "How about a demonstration of our diverse tastes?" I blurted out, channeling what could only be described as an epiphany. "We'll stage a creative liberation day. Everyone can showcase their unique yard styles and celebrate individuality right in front of Karen's pristine lawn." The energy in the air shifted, igniting imaginations with visions of wildly decorated yards, wildflowers peeking out from all corners, and flamingos wearing outfits to match their owners. The crowd shifted on their feet, like a jolt of electric current, each energy-filled face gleaming with a vision of rebellion. Each hesitant nod evolved into energy like a storm brewing. Yes, we would transform our cul-de-sac into a kingdom of creative chaos and laughter. Just then, a voice cut through the clamor of excitement, a slow, rich timbre that resembled something between a grand orchestra tuning up and a disheartened sigh. Mr. Jenkins, brandishing his shaky hands. "Are we allowed to participate without incurring a fine?" he questioned, earnest worry creasing his brow. Bless his heart, the man had had so many citations that I half expected him to develop a conspiracy theory about Karen's secret vendetta against his hydrangeas. A ripple of chuckles passed through the crowd, and I seized the moment to tap into their shared outrage. "Mr. Jenkins, my good man, we're going to take that fine and rub it right back in their faces." The laughter blossomed, echoing a camaraderie that had not existed before, and I could practically hear the gears of revolt cranking to life. "Freedom isn't free if you're hiding it behind a hedge," I quipped, my voice almost theatrical, the crowd erupting in gleeful agreement. "This will not be merely an exhibition. It will be a proclamation, a rallying cry." I stretched out my arms, embracing the absurdity of our predicament and rallying the troops with gusto. The pasty hordes of unyielding HOA adherents were no match for an army of garden-loving rebels. As I breathed in the warm, summery air, thoughts of vivid flowerbed battles crossed my mind, heralding a heroic legacy worthy of epic storytelling. If there was a time for sprinkler battles and lawn ornament placement artistry, it was now. With the newly minted plot thickening, I addressed the throng. Operation Creative Liberation Day will be held next Saturday. We'll stage a home decoration competition right in front of the HOA headquarters. A wave of enthusiasm washed over everyone, and I felt the imperative urgency growing, rolling in the air like summer thunder. We were about to shake the very foundations of their control. I proposed prizes for the most ridiculous, the wildest, and who uses the most outrageous decor to break free from conformity. I concluded with my hands on my hips in the classic superhero pose. Murmurs of excitement enveloped me. A few brave souls even began to shout ideas for their entries, summoning thoughts of inflatable dinosaurs and disco balls. As excitement bubbled and effervesced, the full realization of what we were about to manifest dawned on me like dawn breaking across a peaceful lake. Somewhere nestled beneath the layers of lawn flotsam was a crazy, colorful celebration, not just against Karen, but against the overly strict rules imposed by the HOA. We could paint our yards like surrealist masterpieces, embracing every eccentric whim. I could almost envision my own yard, a riot of swirling colors and daring shapes, complete with flamingos perched haughtily upon repurposed furniture. "This is going to be glorious," I yelled, picturing our unsuspecting target recoil as our over-the-top display of individuality wounded her quiver of pretentious authority. But lurking in the corners, still shadowed by their gaudy pastel blazers, were whispers of rebellion. Someone had to be prepared for the HOA's retaliation. Just then, my secret sharpshooter, Kyle, my retired military marksman neighbor and former sniper, peeked out from behind the tool shed. I had been hoping he would show up to offer his insight into obliterating Karen's plans. "What kind of weaponry do we need, Jordan?" he queried deadpan, causing light laughter to mix with a sense of purpose as we prepared to unleash our creativity. "Do we need something loud to get their attention, like an air horn?" The laughter faded, replaced by deliberate hushed tones. I smirked and leaned closer, adrenaline coursing through me at the thought of Kyle arming us with floral bazookas or something equally ridiculous and delightfully impractical. The stage was set for a neighborly insurgency. Would this little band of misfits succeed against the tyranny of conformity? We were about to find out. Thanks for sticking around with me through the chaos to the end. Want more high-stakes HOA drama? Check out our recent HOA clash with the video on the right. Or let YouTube pick your next wild ride with the video on the left. Whichever way you go, buckle up. There's plenty more HOA insanity on the way. Tune in again for more HOA chaos.